Hi, Stephen here. Just before we start the podcast, I wanted to briefly say something about the awful events of last week where a convention of Jehovah's Witnesses was bombed in Kerala, India. So I'm not going to name the man responsible for the bombing, nor am I going to repeat any of his grievances, because, of course, that's what he wanted. And I think it's important that somebody that kills two women and one little girl doesn't get what he wants. So the victims are Leona Poulos, Kumari, and Libina. Leona was 60, Kumari was 53, and Libina was 12. And so I think we just have to say how sorry we are about that and what a terrible thing that is. Our thoughts are with all of the people that suffered, and there's many others injured as well. So the bomb, there were three bombs apparently, three devices that he made. He set them off at different places within the hall, and there's some horrific pictures as well that have been on YouTube and various different outlets. I don't recommend you watching those pictures, I have to say. So yeah, it's just really, really upsetting. And we've kind of been here before. Last year, I think it was, or maybe earlier this year, there was a shooting in Germany, of course, and people died there. So it's something that we have to call out. We have to, in the strongest possible terms, say how disgusting it is. Killing is not the answer. Killing people is never the answer. We're seeing a lot of killing on the news, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. And this is no different. And yeah, it's just, I'm sure nobody thinks that this is a good way to raise grievances or to make your point, regardless of whatever we think about the organisation and the religious beliefs and so on. These are completely innocent individuals. These are just people who have a belief. We obviously think it's a wrong belief, and we think there are damaging things about the organisation, but these are just ordinary people who are trying to worship in the way that they feel is right. And they should have that right to worship without feeling frightened. So yeah, it's a really depressing thing to hear. And I think it's really important that we all just very simply stand with anybody that is affected by that. Okay, so I didn't write this out as a script. It's just me thinking about it. And so I don't know how coherent it is, but I just wanted to say something on behalf of the podcast, I suppose, that we're thinking about the people that were injured and lost their lives. Hi, welcome to Cult Hackers. My name is Stephen Mather. I'm without Cynane today. She's not feeling so well, but I'm not on my own because we have a very interesting guest. Welcome to the podcast, Cynane.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. This is exciting.
You're very welcome. So I've listened to you talk about your story before, and I thought, yeah, definitely wanted to talk to you about your experience. So maybe just introduce yourself, if possible. You've got a couple of areas that you're very interested in, and you've got a website that you talk about it, and you're in the middle of writing a book. So tell us about yourself, please, Cynane.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm American, which I'm pretty sure you can tell right off the bat. And I'm from Florida, which, has that stereotype for being just completely insane, and it is justified. So, I grew up very fundamentalist evangelical, so like Christian, and in my very small town, it was a very insular kind of controlling environment. there was the influence of non-denominational churches, like Calvary Chapel, which is like a big chain church. They're all over the United States, but they do also have some international locations. And I went to a private Christian school for elementary and middle school, which was very white Christian nationalist, very propaganda-y. The mascot were the Patriots, like Revolutionary War patriots. We had Plymouth Day. They were obsessed with the Pilgrims and with the founding fathers.
Yeah.
And that was also attached to a different non-denominational church. And like largely when you say non-denominational church, at least in the US, I find that they are usually just like Southern Baptist, but with like rock music. Or occasionally they're more like Pentecostal. So most of the churches that I grew up in, like theologically, I don't really think we're very different from Southern Baptist. Which is kind of the stereotypical super conservative evangelical Christian denomination. It's also the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. So, and then I was also involved in an honest to goodness Southern Baptist church. And it's a small town, so all of these different circles were like very overlapping. And there was a big IBLP undercurrent. Institute and Basic Life Principles was an honest to goodness cult that was run by a man named Reverend Bill Gothard. And he started like a really long time ago, like the 60s or 70s or something, but he was really big in like the 80s through the 2000s. And his whole shtick was that you should have as many children as God will bless you with. Hyper patriarchy, hyper purity culture, 19 kids and counting. The Duggar family, they were IBLP. The like church movements that all overlapped with that were like Quiverful was like another brand to that. Also a little bit of like the stay-at-home daughters movement, which I feel like is maybe not as big, but it was basically the belief that like girls should live at home under their parents until they got married, and then they would move into like directly from their father's house to their husband's house, so that they're like always under the patriarchy of a man. But like all of that was kind of like just in the milieu of my adolescence, and my family had no direct involvement with IBLP, which I am extremely grateful for, but every one of my friends, their families, they were using the IBLP homeschooling curriculum. They were going to IBLP summer camps. When I went to undergrad, when I went to school, my best friend went to teach English in Taiwan through an IBLP program. And so like these were the moms who were teaching our Bible studies and like running our summer camps. And like they were the ones who were influencing us. I remember seeing Bill Gothard VHS tapes growing up. Always being told to like, cover your shoulders or wear longer shorts and like that kind of stuff. Wear a t-shirt over your bathing suit because it's Florida. So like there's a lot of beach activities. And then in 2014, 2015 timeframe, like it broke in the news. There were multiple allegations of sexual harassment and even like sexual assault. And then like a bunch of other people stepped forward in the IBLP organization saying like not just Bill Gothard, but basically everyone involved. There was a lot of abuse happening. And then all of the Duggar scandals broke with the oldest son being caught up in a whole bunch of illicit crimes. He's now in prison for like child pornography and things. So
so just to help our listeners, so I think a majority of our listeners are from the US anyway, so I'm guessing many of them will know about all of these names. But for those who don't, the documentary Shiny Happy People, of course, covers the Duggars and the IBLP, and actually that was my education to it. I have to say, I wasn't aware of this world. Obviously, I'd heard of evangelicalism and the southern states of America being very much around this sort of Southern Baptist sort of religion. But yeah, I was very surprised at this whole movement. So yeah, just a bit of context for our listeners might be useful.
That documentary is incredible. But it was just very strange for me to watch it because I knew almost all of it already. and I had seen it growing up, but it was a really weird perspective because, like I said, my family was not involved in it. I just saw it everywhere. So I like
Yeah.
it's just like it's a really weird like dynamic for me personally.
Mm.
And but like I was fully indoctrinated from childhood. Like I believed everything, and I accepted purity culture, and that like this is how you be a good person, this is how you please God. I was the good girl. Like, you give me some rules, I love rules, I'm going to follow the rules. And anytime somebody would like make a new friend or start dating a new boy or something, I was always the friend who was like, oh, are they a Christian?
Right.
Got to make sure. And basically my family, um we were just like different enough that I escaped a lot of, I think, some of the really harmful things that happened
Cool.
in that like ideology. Um, my mother was a firefighter in a time when women were not firefighters, and I call her kind of an accidental feminist because she would never call herself a feminist. I don't
Mm.
think, like,
Mm.
she would say that that's like woke bullshit or something,
Yeah.
but she was. And I saw that growing up, and she had previous life experience. Like, before she had kids, she lived on her own for a long time. Both of my parents were very independent. And she'd been proposed to like 8 times or something. She had abusive relationships. She had seen friends trapped in abusive relationships and stuff. So when my parents had kids, I think they just really doubled down on the fundamentalism because they just wanted to raise us right. I think the
Mm.
intentions were always good. But my mom, the message that I was getting, that like nobody else was, you need to get an education. Like, never trust a man. Like, you should still like wait for God's chosen husband for you. Like, that's good, but you can be married for 15, 20 years and have 3 kids, and he can still walk away, because she had
Mm.
just seen that happen. And so
Mm.
she's like, you know, just have something of yourself, be your own person, get an education. And all of the girls that I grew up with were not getting that message at home, and I didn't probably
Mm.
realize that until adulthood. The divide that we were getting like at home. And they were all being told, God's going to send you like a mail ordered husband, and he's going to be your perfect match. And if you are pure, and if you wait till marriage, and if you follow all the rules, your life will be perfect. Like, you won't have any problems. You'll have domestic bliss. You'll have, all of these beautiful children, and like everything will be good. Not, and that's just not reality. That's
Mm.
exactly how
Cool.
you end up in abusive relationships, and,
Mm.
ignoring the realities of like financial stresses and family stress. And like, it's ridiculous. And I know so many girls who went to Bible college, found a Bible husband, and were divorced within 1 to 2 years. And that's the greatest stigma that you can possibly have in this culture, is like to be divorced or
Mm.
whatever. So it's just tragic. And everybody I knew got married by the time they were 19, 20. Like, they couldn't drink alcohol, and they were getting married.
Mm.
All the weddings that I went to were dry weddings, for
Mm.
everybody but me, because I had mini bottles. And like, they were all like saving their first kiss for their wedding day, like that kind
Right.
of thing. So um
So
yeah.
you've got this purity culture. So obviously that's the way of life. What about the theology? So this is something that is quite interesting to me. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and so our theology was a bit different, I think, to
Mhm.
the general fundamentalist Christian. So, what was your kind of beliefs around the Bible and the end of the world and all these sorts of things?
So mm, I distinctly remember, probably one of my earliest memories. I was probably 6 to 8 years old. I don't know. My mom telling me that the Bible, we believe in biblical inerrancy. The
Right.
Bible is the one true spoken word of God. It is absolute, it is non-contradictory, and it is like flawless and perfect and wonderful. And well, that's complete nonsense if you actually study the Bible like
Mm.
outside of like an indoctrinated perspective.
Yeah.
But and I remember being told that from the youngest age possible, and my mom
Mm.
telling me, the Bible verse of false prophets, the scariest thing were false prophets, and like there are going to be people who try to trick you
Mm.
with like false theologies and things. And if
Mm.
you don't know if it's like a false prophet or not, you can always just turn to the Bible, because that's like the ultimate answer.
Yeah.
And they were very much original sin,
Yeah.
and hell, like hell and
Literal
heaven,
hell.
like,
Yeah.
oh, of course, yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
like you were going to
Burning
burn in hell, eternal
eternity. Yeah.
damnation, eternal
Okay.
conscious torment,
Mm.
and if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and ask him to forgive you of your sins, and it's not a religion, it's a relationship. You have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And they, in my circles, were very much obsessed with the rapture, and
Mm.
end times and a biblical apocalypse and the Antichrist, and like the Left Behind movies were essentially
Yes.
scripture. And so, and there's words for that, and I don't know them off the top of my head, like millennial dispensationalism, or like whatever. I don't know the exact terms for
Mm.
it, but like, whether or not the Christians were going to get to, zoom up to heaven before or after the tribulation, there were debates on that, but like we were zooming one way or the other. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, the
Okay.
theology was very much
Yeah.
doomsday-y, very
Yeah.
like cultic, apocalyptic. My mother
Yeah.
also sat me down and told me, probably when I was about 10 or 12, I remember this again distinctly, that Jesus Christ is coming back in her lifetime based on some
Mm.
prophecy that she had seen. And so I needed to be ready at any moment for like Jesus to come back. And
Yeah.
then when I first started dating my husband, my parents did not accept him. They were not kind in any way. And
Mm.
partially it was because he was a Catholic, and Catholics are not real Christians and they're going to hell.
Mm.
And then partially, and I think that this is just maybe my family's personal dysfunction mixed with kind of the purity culture thing, but I genuinely think that they thought that they were in some way going to almost get to pick my husband.
Mm.
Um, not in like a prearranged marriage or anything, but just I don't know. And so they didn't accept him. We dated for like 6-ish years before we got married. So we were together for a very long time, and they literally were like not nice to him until like after we were engaged. And my my husband told me about this after the fact, because I was not in the room, and I still don't even really know how to process this, but apparently my mother told him just totally casually, like this is a totally normal good thing for her to say to him. She was like, oh well, like I had prayed and begged God that the rapture would happen before Cynane was old enough to start dating, but I guess you're the next best option. So she was literally, I mean, essentially just praying that I would die a virgin, which is just so messed up. And you
Mm.
look at, and to me, like, that's so creepy. Because if you look at like Jonestown and Heaven's Gate and the Manson family and all of these honest to goodness destructive cults, where you have like mothers harming their own children, and you think like, how could that possibly happen? How could any woman hurt her own child? And then my mom says some crazy ass shit like that, and she's just like, wish you died a virgin, like that's exactly
Yeah.
how.
Mm. Yeah.
Extreme fundamentalism.
Yeah. There's lots of similarities there. Probably not quite as extreme in relation to relationships, although you had to marry a fellow Jehovah's Witness, so that there was no doubt, and obviously there's not that many of them, so your pool is quite small of people that you're able to marry. um yeah, and all the doomsday stuff, it's a slightly different flavor, but it boils down to the same stuff. Armageddon's coming. The wicked people are going to be destroyed, apart from the fact that we were the only good people, and you guys, I'm afraid, would be falling foul of Christ's wrath. It's all the same stuff, and I guess it brings you up in a kind of an atmosphere of fear constantly, doesn't it? You're always on the lookout for. I mean, you keep on the watch is literally what the Bible says.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like there's words for it now. Didn't know them when I was growing up, but like rapture anxiety is like a real thing. Like if you lose your mom in the grocery store and you're like, oh my God, they've been raptured, I'm going to hell. Like, do I have the mark of the beast? Like my mother told me at one point that like when I would like way ahead of the game, like back when I was in like elementary or middle school, that the flu shot was the mark of the beast and I should not get the flu shot. Yeah, like extreme fear of just everything. And with all of that, you kind of are taught that you just have no control over your own life. And there's so much conflicting ideology that it causes so much confusion. Like, I don't know, and this is such a common thing. Like, I don't know how many times I prayed the sinner's prayer, just like begging to be saved, because you don't actually know 100% if you've been saved, if your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life or whatever. And so, as like a child, you pray the sinner's prayer like dozens and hundreds of times, like every night, just like hoping that you're saved. And then, and with like the purity culture stuff, like I remember talking to other little girls and stuff, we're 12, 13, 14 years old, and they're all just like praying that, I just pray that like God sends me, that I find my husband attractive. I pray that like, I don't have to marry somebody ugly, because it didn't matter if you liked them or if they were attractive or anything else. It was just, oh, this is who God sent me. This is that you have no choice in the matter whatsoever. And so there's just like a lot of fear and like for me, my family was very evangelical, but like we weren't a part of IBLP. So I feel like there was almost a little bit of a difference on like the white Christian nationalist scale. They were very white nationalist, a lot of racism and a lot of the political side of things from my family. So absolutely terrified of Democrats. I didn't know a Democrat growing up. Democrat was a slur. And they were obsessed with crime. They were obsessed with like big cities were essentially just like every big city was just Sodom and Gomorrah. Like when I was like 12, we took a road trip and we were in New York City for a day, and like my parents wouldn't let us spend the night in New York City because they were convinced that we would just get like shanked on the street. And so like, but at the same time, like you're being told, and I remember this was a personal struggle for me. I remember basically being told like you are going to be like the victim of some sort of like home invasion or like mugging, or like you're going to be the victim of some sort of crime at some point. And so my family had like a bunch of guns and like very Republican, but at the same time you're being told that people who don't believe in Jesus are going to burn in hell for eternity. And so my little 13-year-old brain obsessed over this idea of like, if I get like attacked on the street, I should let them kill me because I'll go to heaven. But if I use self-defense, I'm condemning somebody to hell for eternity, and so like, shouldn't I just like accept that? And, but of course, that's not the message that you're being told as a white Christian nationalist. You're being told that you need to have 17 guns. So it was a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of like mismatched ideology. Like it doesn't actually make any sense.
And that's what you're trying to do as a child, isn't it? You're trying to make sense of the senseless, really. You're trying to make sense of these contradictory ideas and piece them together. Yeah, I recognize different situations, but that anxiety trying to make it make sense, we've heard that sort of said before. One of the things that you are really interested in, and that I'm interested in talking to you about, is this link between fundamentalist Christianity of various different sorts, and I suppose religion in general, sort of fundamentalist religions, and the conspiracy theories, and the way that people think, and the link between that, and added to obviously things like nationalism and so on. So, what have you learned about that? Because I know you've been thinking a lot about this and you're writing about it. So, what have you learned that you think is interesting about these links?
Yeah. So the link between fundamentalist religion and conspiracy theories is, the Venn diagram is a circle. The link is like fundamental. And I saw it growing up, but I didn't recognize it. Because everything's just so normalized when you're a child in these situations. So like, I mean, like the whole rapture stuff is essentially just a conspiracy theory. All of those ideas. My parents were obsessed with, they hated Obama. They believed he was a secret Muslim, conspiracy theory. They And as I got older, I could see that, like, oh, that's a weird belief, like that's not true, but I didn't connect it to the Christianity stuff. I just thought that it was because they were like old people, or like maybe they just know something that I don't know because I was completely politically ignorant, or it's not a big deal. They just believe some kooky things. And so like when Obama became the president, our gun arsenal got a lot bigger. I knew one family who had a legitimate underground bunker. And my parents were convinced that like Obama was going to do some sort of like communist takeover of the United States. They have 5 acres. And at one point I was in like, I want to say high school or undergrad. I was probably an undergrad. And I went home and I was looking for powdered sugar. And my mom has this great walk-in pantry, beautiful pantry. And I walk in there and I'm looking for powdered sugar. And there's a 5-gallon bucket in the closet, in the pantry. And it's corn seeds. And we're not farmers. And so I feel like the average person would find a 5-gallon bucket of corn and ask why. But I was immediately upset because I knew why without even having to ask. And so I shouted out to my mom, who was in the other room, and I was like, Ma, are these apocalypse seeds? And her response was literally just, so what if they are?
What's apocalypse seeds?
What's apocalypse? I love that you don't know.
Honestly, I don't know. No.
Well, they have 5 acres. They were waiting for Obama to like take over the country as like some sort of like satanic Muslim like demigod, right. And they were going to have to farm their land. Right. Because society was going to collapse. And so they were going to have to farm their land. So she had apocalypse seeds. They had an apocalypse, gun arsenal. Like that level, like doomsday prep stuff. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And so like that kind of stuff I identified as not good, but I didn't think it was important. And then just like one other example, because like it's just so upsetting. After I graduated undergrad, I'm a civilian contractor with the Navy in the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Training Program. And so I work with the Navy. And when I graduated from this training program that I now work in, my parents came to visit for the graduation ceremony. And it was the same weekend that Trump was taking over the White House from Obama. And at my apartment, the stairs going up to my apartment, I shared a landing with one other apartment. And the other apartment was a naval officer. So it was a guy who was in the same training program as me. And he's like 22 years old, 22, 23 years old, obviously not an important person. Okay. And my parents corner him in the stairwell because they're old people. They love to talk to strangers. And I'm just like, whatever, they're your problem for like the next 5 minutes. And, but out of nowhere, and this was kind of like the craziest thing I'd heard from my family up until this point. She'd never said anything like this before, but just like out of nowhere, she goes, oh, I have a question for you. I saw this thing on YouTube. Is it true that when Obama declares himself to be like the Muslim king of the United States and refuses to relinquish power to Trump, when, not if, is it true that the seat of power for the true United States shifts to like the chief nuclear admiral of the Navy, and that's the guy who gets to decide when we nuke the White House? And my mouth is literally open, was not expecting this. He wasn't expecting this. Nobody was expecting this. And I'm thinking I'm going to lose my security clearance. I'm about to be reported to somebody. And, and, and this poor child was so nice. And he had a thick Texas accent, and he was just like,
Yeah.
well, ma'am, I don't rightly know. And I was just like, why would you think that this 22-year-old trainee
He's
would
in the
know
know.
just everything about it was so wrong. And I scooted them into my apartment, and I was just like, what are you doing? That was insane. And both of my parents just turn on me, and they're like, you don't tell us what we can and cannot talk to people about. Like, that's disrespectful. We're your parents. You just don't know what's going on. And I was like, you need to get off YouTube. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's
It's crazy. I heard you tell that story on another podcast, and I thought I said to you, please tell us that story because it is hilarious. And it is so, I suppose, yeah, it's the confidence. This is the thing that I think I find really interesting about some of these conspiracy commentators, I suppose. It's the confidence with which they make these proclamations. I mean, I'm not as confident about most things in life, but they seem to be really confident about knowing exactly what's going on. Absolutely fascinating.
it's exhausting. Well, and it's because they live in a world that they've made up for themselves, and so of course they're confident in it because they have the absolute truth, and they're just used to being 100% right about everything. But yeah, so like I grew up, that kind of stuff happened, and I was like, my parents are losing it. But I again didn't realize that it was anything to do with my faith, and I was very much still indoctrinated at this point.
Okay.
And then 2020 happened, and basically, shit hit the fan, and it did for everyone, 100%. But when the pandemic happened, it was July of 2020, and that's hardly into the first like big spike for us for the pandemic. We did not have vaccines, and I was an essential worker, so I was still going into work every day. My husband got to work from home for a long time. We weren't married at the time yet, but and my best friend, my absolute best friend, we'll call her Kathy, she had been planning to stay with us for like just a night or two on her way to visit family, and had been planning for this since like before the pandemic. And then the pandemic happened, and I told her, I was like, if you need a free place to stay, like you can still stay with us, but please understand that I'm still exposed, like it's potentially dangerous. And like normally when people come to visit, we do the whole touristy thing, we do the restaurants, we do the sightseeing. When you come, like we're not going to be able to do that for obvious reasons. And she was like, yeah, whatever. And she came to stay, and she got out of her car. The first thing she said to me was like, oh, hey, like, do I need a face mask? And I was like, yeah, obviously. And she was like, oh, haha, this is the first time I've ever worn a face mask. And it was in July. And it was just like very confusing. And then she was like, oh, we don't wear face masks in Florida. And I was just like, who is we? Like, what are you talking about? And at the time, and it's difficult to talk about this now because now it's just so obvious. Hindsight's 2020. But in the moment, did not know what QAnon was, did not know that there was going to be a huge anti-mask movement, anti-vax movement, knew nothing. All right. So it was just weird comments. And I just like brush it aside. We move on. She spends the rest of the weekend making fun of us for taking COVID seriously. And it was just very strange. When she was teaching English in Taiwan through that cult IBLP program, she had met one of her other really good friends, who I had met once. And she was a girl from California who had been raised more deeply involved in IBLP. And this friend was posting a bunch of stuff on social media, on like Instagram stories, saying how like face masks were child abuse, face masks are slavery. These are end times. Jesus is coming back any second now. There's going to be a communist wave that overtakes the United States. She's talking about like fleeing the country to like live in the Amazonian forest, like just insane. Talking like stuff about like 5G radiation and like patriots and stuff about like pedophilia, and like it was just like, where is this coming from? And I was talking to Kathy about it, and I was just like, yo, your friend's lost her mind, like she is off the deep end, what is going on? And Kathy was just like not bothered, and she was just like, oh, I don't know, you don't believe in any conspiracy theories? And I was just like, what does that mean? Like like I don't believe in any conspiracy theories. So again, just like a really weird conversation. We move on. And then the next day she sends me a voice message that literally ruined my life. Like, this is the exact moment that like changed the trajectory of things for me, was this voice message. And she was like, hey, because we had been talking about conspiracy theories yesterday, I thought that you might think that this is interesting. And she said, my best friend from this church that she went to in our hometown, and it's a small town, and I know multiple people who go to this church. She's like, my best friend who from this church in our hometown told me that when the vaccines become available, they're going to be full of secret metal, and the metal in your blood is going to interact with 5G radiation in order to either control your mind and make you vote Democrat or kill you. She's not sure which one. And at first I was like, oh, that's so funny. Like, your friend found this weird thing on the internet, right? Like, that's hilarious. And she was like, no, 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 no. Like, this girl believes this. Like, this, she believes this. And I lost my mind. And I was just like, if you need to reconsider all of your life choices for tolerating the existence of this person, let alone being friends with them. And if anybody that you know other than me says the word radiation to you, I have a degree in nuclear engineering, you need to slap them and walk away. And I called her friend a smooth brain. And Kathy was just like, I think that's a bit harsh. And I was like, you don't get to tell me the 5G radiation is going to control my mind and expect me not to react with violence. Like, this is ridiculous. And you know, and to date, up to that point, this was the most insane thing I had ever heard. I was like, this is insane. Since then I've heard worse, but
yeah.
But at this point I was like, something is wrong. Kathy is my age. She is a young person. She is not a boomer. She's not my parents. It's weird that she's falling for this stuff, and I'm now concerned. And her friend from California was falling for this stuff. She's also our age. And then as I'm paying attention, I'm seeing every single person in my hometown start sharing this stuff. I'm getting messages from like my friends' moms talking about George Soros and Bill Gates running a secret cabal of Satanists, and being like videos of preachers at pulpits teaching this stuff to people. My mom starts sending me things from Simone Gold, who is the woman who started America Frontline Doctors Association. I don't know if you're familiar. They're the people.
That's the name I don't know.
They're the people who popularized the hydroxychloroquine conspiracy theory.
Right. Okay.
And then we're conveniently selling hydroxychloroquine. So, which was a treatment that like was proven not to be effective for COVID. And so my parents started stockpiling hydroxychloroquine instead of like getting the vaccine, thought that vitamin D was going to like completely cure them of COVID. And my dad has one lung, and he is a cancer survivor, and he's over 65 years old. And so I was very concerned. And, I went to my brother and I was like, I need your help. Like, we got to talk to our parents and like make them take the pandemic seriously. And he was just like, we should just let the weak die, is what he told me.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is just absolutely evil. And he said that the CDC was lying about the death numbers and that it was all like made up. And so at the same time that all of this is happening, a week after Kathy had visited, my husband proposed. And so we're now planning our wedding while all this crazy stuff is unfolding. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I figure out what QAnon is. And so I do a deep dive into QAnon. I figure out what that is. And for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure everybody knows at this point, but it's a conspiracy theory that like somebody with a Q level security clearance was leaking information like directly from the Trump administration to people. That there was a satanic cabal of elites, billionaire elites, who were pulling the strings of global governments and economies to drive the world toward an era of like one world order. And they're also running like massive rings of like child sex trafficking for like satanic ritualistic blood sacrifice purposes. And like some versions of the conspiracy theory, they're like breeding children in tunnels under every major city. So now you've got like mole children, it's insane. And but this is where all of that Bill Gates and George Soros and pedophilia and 5G radiation, all those things that didn't make any sense and didn't fit together, that like the California friend was sharing and like all this stuff. Now it makes sense. I was like, oh, it's QAnon. And I went to everybody in my life, in my family, my bridesmaids from my hometown, my immediate family, my parents. And I was like, hey, I don't know why the white evangelicals are the ones who are overwhelmingly falling for these conspiracy theories. And it was white evangelicals. Like statistically, it was like a large portion. But you're going to start to see it because our whole hometown is nothing but white evangelicals. And I want to pre-warn you on it. And Kathy just like would not engage, would not have a conversation. She was like, I can't believe you don't believe in child sex trafficking. And that's it was a text message exchange. I was like, you can literally just reread what I wrote. I said, Hillary Clinton is not eating babies. That's not the same thing as saying that child sex trafficking does not exist. That's a very real issue. Sure. Just maddening. And then one of my bridesmaids thought that Wayfair was shipping children, which was a huge conspiracy theory in 2020. And I was like, no, that's a conspiracy theory. And she did kind of listen to me.
Wayfair, is this the shopping
have you not heard about that?
Yeah, Wayfair. I've heard of Wayfair because we bought a lamp from them, which wasn't very good. But I had no idea they were in the child trafficking game as well.
Oh my God. So this is actually a big deal because if you study kind of like the history of QAnon, it started on 4chan in October of 2017. So pretty early into the first like Trump administration. And it was started on 4chan, very quickly moved to 8chan. And these are like some very sketchy weirdo websites that literally nobody goes to except for like super nerds. And I'm an engineer, so I knew about them because I'm surrounded by super nerds. But what happened in the summer of 2020, which is exactly when QAnon hit me, it was three things. One, early was COVID. It was the COVID pandemic massively like soft pilled a bunch of people into being like, what's really happening? Like maybe this was man-made, like all kinds of stuff like that. So like it just opened people up to kind of like conspiratorial conversation and alternative information sources. And then in the summer of 2020, and I feel like this is the thing that like most people don't focus on enough. Well, I'll skip over to like in the fall of 2020, you had voter fraud. You know, the Trump won the election, like that kind of stuff. But what happened in the summer of 2020 was this hashtag Save the Children movement, which some people call like pastel QAnon. And it really started a lot with that Wayfair shipping conspiracy. There was a conspiracy theory that Wayfair was shipping children in cabinets as a part of like child sex trafficking. And like you could find a cabinet on Wayfair for like $15,000 and it would be named the Amanda cabinet. And like the conspiracy theory is that you were ordering a child named Amanda in a cabinet. And it was complete lunacy. This is not true. This has not happened. It's ridiculous. And but it got so
they can't
popular.
Even make a lamp properly.
It was so popular that like I forget the exact name, like the United States Trafficking Hotline had to put out a statement saying, please stop spreading this Wayfair conspiracy theory. We are being inundated with hundreds of calls and we can't help people who actually need help because we're being flooded with misinformation. And then on the back of this, because that was so popular, a bunch of QAnon influencers purposefully stole the hashtag Save the Children. And Save the Children is a legitimate organization that does a lot of really good work. I think it's been around since like the 1920s or something. They stole that organization's hashtag, started making a bunch of QAnon info posts with like false statistics on child sex trafficking and like QAnon conspiracy theory stuff, and putting it on Instagram and Facebook. So you moved from 4chan and 8chan and these like sketchy weirdo nerd websites onto like mainstream platforms. And it was the same summer that Black Lives Matter was kind of taking over in the United States because we were building up to the election. And you had a bunch of Christian and Mormon mommy bloggers who wanted to be moral crusaders, but were not going to jump on the BLM bandwagon
Mm.
because they're racist. And so what's more important than racism? Child sex trafficking. And so it
Mm.
was this very convenient, like one up, like moral crusader situation,
Mm.
massively mainstreamed the QAnon narrative in a soft pilled format. So they're not talking about adrenochrome or mole children, or Jewish space lasers. They're talking about, we're just worried about child sex trafficking. We're just worried
Mm.
about, a satan, like an elite,
Yeah.
and but the danger of that is that, again, organizations like Kid Safe and Save the Children and other like legitimate law enforcement and charity organizations were flooded overwhelmingly with
Mm.
false claims and like accusations, and it actively impaired their ability to actually do their job. And so all of these, Christian Mormon mommy bloggers who are just like, we're just raising awareness, we're distracting awareness from what
Mm.
actually needed to be focused on. And it like makes my blood absolutely boil. But yeah, so
Yes, that's interesting. It reminds me quite a lot of the Satanic Panic,
yeah.
which sort of happened many years ago now. But it's the same sort of thing, you know. I mean, I guess it's like, well, why would you not be? Why would you not care about this really important? You know, why do you not care about abuse of children? And obviously, of course, you'd care about any hint of that happening, but it's then the commitment that you're expected to make to the next level of what they think is actually going on. Yeah, it's very that's very interesting. Okay, again, the fundamentalist Christian mentality seems to leave people open, particularly susceptible to this way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this on our podcast before. Personally, I'd like to get your insight on this, but personally, I think it's because actually, you know, if you think about Satan, the devil, invisible creature ruling the world by influencing the authorities and false religion and so on, this is like the original conspiracy theory, isn't it? So you're primed for it, really.
Yeah, 100%. And so yes, basically what happened for me was that like after all of this drama and after our wedding, I had one moment of like a physical snap, like immediately after our wedding. I just like
Mm.
pushed through it, like don't burn down every bridge. Like, you must not understand what's going on. You must be wrong. It can't possibly be this bad. And so like, I kicked Kathy out of the wedding. I was like, don't show up. I burnt that bridge, but I was like, the rest of
Right.
the bridges, like, let's not burn them down. And
Yeah.
then immediately I was like, oh no, it is that bad.
Mm.
This is actually happening. And it is because they are white Christian nationalists. It is because they are evangelicals. It is because of the faith that I have and that I was raised in that they are believing these things. And I had a physical snap. And like that
Wow.
was kind of like my deconstruction moment.
That's very interesting.
And I needed to know why. And, for me, it was partially kind of like I need to know why, because like these are still my family. These are still my best friends. Like I still care about them.
Mm.
Like I need to understand why. And like it also ended up kind of just being understanding myself because I was a part of this. I believed all of this. And so basically what I didn't know where to start, and I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't have the language of deconstruction or ex-evangelical or any of that. And I didn't know that there were other people like me. And I didn't
Mm.
know that there were books or anything. And I ended up finding a couple just like humor comedy like TikTok pages of like April LaJoy or Lacey Bean, who were kind of making fun of the evangelical nonsense. And I was like, oh my God, I have never seen something like this before. So social media was such a lifeline during this, and podcasts like this one. So like, thank you so
Mm.
much. And once I had a little bit of the language, I was able to find the resources, and I read crap ton of books, just like as many books as I could get my hands on, because I needed to understand like the history of the church, like going back to like Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell in the 1950s, 1960s, the how the evangelical movement morphed into the political sphere, the creation of the religious
Mm.
right, and there's a whole history to that. I needed to understand like the theology and like if my evangelical faith was wrong and flawed and like the rapture isn't happening and like all this stuff, like what is the Bible? What is, are LGBTQ people abominations? The answer is no. Like, I needed to figure all of that out. And what I found ultimately, and why did they believe the conspiracy theories? And ultimately what I found that was the most useful for me to understand it was when I found books on like cult psychology. So like Dr. Robert J. Lipton, Dr. Yanya Lalich and Margaret Singer and Stephen Hassan and like these psychologists and psychiatrists, and they had written a bunch of books and I like read a bunch of those. And a lot of people don't like to use the word cult fairly because it's been so socially stigmatized and it's just tossed around like pejorative, like anything you don't like is a cult. And like that's nonsense. But when you think of like Jonestown, drinking the Kool-Aid and Heaven's Gate and like honest to goodness, destructive cults, the definition that like some of these experts use is a charismatic leader, a transcendent belief system, a system of control, and a system of influence. And when you look at white Christian nationalism, it does not fit that definition. It's not a traditional destructive cult.
Did you know it's estimated that there are over 3 million podcasts currently out there? So trying to get noticed and grow listeners is really hard. If you're enjoying this podcast, why not tell a friend about it? We can be found on all the podcast apps, so please tell them to search for Cult Hackers. In fact, why not pause the show right here and do it now? You can find the pod link on our show notes, so you can just copy and paste it into a message or share it using your app. I think you're right about the term cult. It's a complex one. So where do you stand then in terms of your evangelicalism? Do you call it a cult or cultic or
I think it's cult-ish. I think that's very fair. But I don't call it a cult. What the term that Robert J. Lipton had, Dr. Robert J. Lipton, was totalistic ideologies. And he was in his book Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, he was studying prisoners of war who were being released from like when the communist China took over, and there was a lot of violence, and they had these thought reform prisons, and they also had like thought reform schools, and eventually he was studying case studies of like people who were being released from these brainwashing camps essentially, and he developed his like 8 methods of thought reform, and he was describing communist China, and something on that scale also would not necessarily be called a destructive cult. It's something else. He called it a totalistic ideology. And what traditional destructive cults do is they have a totalistic ideology, but they center the veneration around their charismatic leader. So you can have a totalistic ideology, but that is not necessarily a cult. And white evangelical nationalism is a totalistic ideology. It's an absolute worldview. And the word worldview for me is like such a linchpin, because I grew up hearing that word. My private Christian school advertises on their website to this day that they will instill a biblical worldview in your children. They're literally advertising that they will indoctrinate your children into a totalistic ideology for you because you don't have the time or resources to homeschool, which is the proper way to do it. And there's a quote from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes, that is just like huge for me, where he said that once you have eliminated all of the impossible options, whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And when you have a totalistic ideology or an absolute worldview, it produces what Robert J. Lipton called personal closure, or what Dr. Yanya Lalich called bounded choice, where you have removed part of reality as impossible. And then whatever you're left with, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Those are your bounded choices. And so, why did Trump lose the 2020 election? The fact that the majority of Americans don't want to live in a homophobic, misogynistic theocracy is not a bounded choice. So it must be voter fraud. Or, when you look at like Trump trying to pull out of NATO agreements or these international treaties and things, from the absolute worldview of like white Christian nationalists, it must be a sign of the end times. And so conspiracy theories become completely inseparable from totalistic ideologies, because they're just a way of explaining events and phenomenon through the totalistic perspective of these belief systems. And so it makes perfect sense then that in America, where white Christian nationalism is so prevalent, like on a scale that I don't think anybody realizes, that it would essentially just be in the water. That like these conspiracy theories and this like, these like alternative information media things, it's inescapable. And like some of the statistics on that, some books that recently came out, Andrew Whitehead and I want to say Samuel L. Perry wrote Taking America Back for God. And then like Samuel L. Perry and Philip Gorski wrote The Flag and the Cross. And they're sociologists. And so they did polls and looked at the demographic statistics of white Christian nationalism in the United States. And they found that like a full third of Americans on some level adhere to white Christian nationalism. Other polls have found that a full 60% of Americans believe that America was originally founded on Judeo-Christian principles, which is like a founding premise of white Christian nationalism. And 45% of all Americans believe that this country should still be founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Screw the separation of church and state, I guess. And
yeah, it's really interesting because obviously I'm from the UK, and we, don't get me wrong, we have our own problem with nationalism and racism and fundamentalist religions and conspiracy theories, but there does seem to be a mix in the States that makes it particularly susceptible. I think the other thing that you have in the States is a deep suspicion of the state, and that also feeds into a lot of these conspiracy theories, doesn't it? I don't trust the government. In somewhere like the UK, we're all always very skeptical, but it's not the same level of sheer hatred for the government and for the because we aren't individual states. But yeah, I mean, the United States is very much, it was based upon this separation of church and state, unlike the UK, which has a Church of England. It's very strange.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is, as you said earlier, the Satanic Panic in the 1980s. It's just so baked into our history that we hop from moral panic to moral panic. And I find it actually absolutely fascinating, that book by Robert J. Lipton, where he's talking about the totalistic ideology of like communist China and like how they brainwash people. I think that something that's almost been a little bit lost to time for Americans is that, we had the Red Scare in the 1950s, the McCarthy era. And we're still living with that today. My family was obsessed with like communism and stuff growing up. And if you send your kid to public school, they're going to turn your kid into like godless communists, like that kind of thing. And I think we got it wrong because we saw these American Western war heroes, priests and preachers and doctors and veterans who had been in these thought reform prisons being released after like 3 years or so. And they come out of them talking about how much they hate the imperial West and how great communist China is. And, I feel like we've kind of lost those individual stories. Like, I didn't grow up hearing about those, but they were in the news back in like the 40s and 50s when the original Red Scare was happening. And I think that Americans looked at that and they were like, wow, that's really scary. How could they turn these red-blooded Americans into communist sympathizers? And so they looked ironically at this totalistic ideology of the communist Chinese movement there, and they turned it around. And instead of being afraid of thought reform, they were afraid of communism. And so they focused on the wrong thing. And in response to one totalistic ideology, they just made their own. The Red Scare, the moral panic, like drove us into like this like very anti-communist, like white Christian nationalist. And so we hopped from the Red Scare moral panic to the the 60s had like the free love, like we're, family values, moral panic. And then you had the 80s with the satanic panic. And then today we have QAnon, which is essentially nothing but like a big moral panic. And tied to that, we have what I kind of think is like the heart of the white Christian nationalist totalistic ideology, this family values moral panic, which is where you get this like violent anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, this very misogynistic, like white Christian patriarchy, women belong in the home kind of thing. And like the reason for all of life's ills and America's problems, it's not like, racial injustice or economic problems or corruption. It's because like we just don't have strong enough families, and we need to internalize all of those problems. And if you're nicer to your neighbor and if you pray more, then like we'll fix the country. Not, we need to address like police brutality or the criminal justice system. And the other thing that you said something that reminded me about this earlier, and you had talked about this on a previous episode that I thought was really fascinating. White Christian nationalism doesn't explain everything. Not everyone who falls for QAnon is a white Christian nationalist. I'm talking about my family and my experience. Sure. And a large chunk of the people who believe this stuff is because of white Christian nationalism. But you also always have those people on the fringe who have been like Bigfoot hunters and like 9/11 truthers from the beginning, that kind of stuff. They're always going to be fringe though. But part of the other thing that has like driven so many people into all of this is I have a book that I actually have not read yet. It's called Truth Decay, and it talks about how every time there's a major advance in information technology, there's a spike in conspiracy theory rhetoric. So when we invented news radio, when you invented news television, there was a spike. And I have another book called American Conspiracy Theories, written by two political science professors who try to address like what makes people believe in conspiracy theories historically in the United States. Like, when have we had like the most conspiracy theories? It was written before the Trump administration, so I don't think that it it has some issues. But they said that like one of the key things that overwhelmingly affects like macro scale conspiracy belief is the information, like the media environment. And so now, we had radio, we had television, we have social media, and that like information technology is just so much exponentially different than anything that we have ever possibly had before. And you have these algorithms driving people into these conspiracy theories and things that, when you talk about traditional destructive cults, a lot of the experts will talk about how people don't go out of their way to join cults. They are tricked, they are recruited. And a key element of, like cults and cult recruitment is that it is deceptive. And so when you join, you either don't know what you're joining, or you only see like level 1 and 2, and you don't see like what's going to be required of you in like the more inner circles. And they use thought reform, like Robert J. Lifton's 8 Characteristics of Thought Reform, to get you to adopt their totalistic ideology. And those 8 characteristics are like loading the language. So like speaking in like slang. The Scientologists are like the worst for this. They have like literal dictionaries of all their different words. And so like learning that language is almost kind of like a puzzle, and like the human mind loves puzzles and things. So like you just try to conform. And me and Kathy used to make fun of all the people that we went to church with for speaking Christianese. And now I see that as just loading the language and mystic manipulation. And there's 8 characteristics. I don't know. But they use all of these unethical manipulative tactics to get you to adopt a totalistic ideology deceptively and join this group. The algorithms are now doing that.
That's right.
Automatically with like calculated precision to send people into these like outrage spirals and like go down the rabbit hole and stuff. So you don't have to have like, a Moonie talking you into this on the side of the street. You are just getting this, you essentially kind of almost like cyber thought reform, that is feeding into everybody's like pre-existing biases.
Yep. Yeah.
And like driving them on their own.
Yeah, I think that's obviously we did talk about that on a previous episode, and it occurred to me that well, first of all, I thought, it's only a matter of time before you have a essentially an AI as a cult leader, because the AI, what it will do is it's not doing this thoughtfully in terms of thinking, right, I've got a goal that I want to trick people. It's just following an algorithm that delivers the outcome that it's been designed to deliver, like getting more people to view a YouTube channel. It's as simple as that, but it's managed to learn how to do that in the most effective way, and part of that is to change the individuals who are actually watching these videos, which I thought is very that's quite a dangerous, or very, very dangerous thing. So in a way, we don't need an AI cult leader. We've actually already got it happening now through those algorithms. So absolutely. There's a word occurred to me as you were talking about worldview. I wanted to just come back to that a second, because you might be interested in it. You seem like somebody that's really interested in words. In the literature, there's a German word that is used quite a bit in cultic literature called Weltanschauung, that I like to throw in because it's such a brilliant word. It like trips off the tongue. Weltanschauung, and I mean, suppose literally it does mean worldview, but it's got this sense of, it's the lens through which you see everything, and it colors everything, and that is exactly what happens. So as a Jehovah's Witness, you see an earthquake, you hear an earthquake, or you see a war, and straight away you're reminded of the scripture in Matthew or Luke that talks about earthquakes in one, or wars in one place after another, and pestilence and earthquakes, and so on and so on. And so you see everything through that lens. And so that's the same for the conspiracy theorist. You're asked to wear a mask, but I have never understood why people saw just wearing a bit of cloth around your mouth as some sort of dark conspiracy. But again, if you're looking at everything through this very particular lens, your Weltanschauung is that this is all part of this bigger picture and it's all connected, then of course that's how you can do it. That's why you see it as dangerous.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna butcher it. I'll be talking about this in like weeks. I'll be like Felton blah. But I genuinely believe that we don't have the language to describe what is going on fully. I talk about like totalistic ideologies and thought reform and like these things. Other people might say like cults, or like high control religion, or like whatever. But like I think psychology is a fairly new science.
Absolutely.
And applying it to these like group psychology, like we don't have it. We don't have the language. And like not enough people are studying this, and it needs to be studied, because essentially what is happening, and where this white Christian nationalism, more than, I keep using Jonestown as an example, more than Jonestown, white Christian nationalism, there are parallels, but like that's not like a great comparison. More than like destructive cults, it is most similar and most paralleled to like historical fascist totalitarianism. And if you look at like fascist Italy, fascist Germany, obviously like the communist Chinese, that was not fascism, that was communism, but it was totalitarianism. And so if you are looking at these like large scale societal like thought reform programs, that is what we're looking at in the United States right now. And so I've read a bunch of books on totalitarianism and fascism and populism and all of that as well. And so for us in America, it's fascism. And Dr. Robert maybe Paxton, he was a professor at Columbia of history. He specialized in Vichy France, French fascism, and he wrote a book called The Anatomy of Fascism. And in that book, it's been a while since I read it, but he's not talking about the US. he's just talking about fascism. He wrote this before the Trump administration. He is just saying like, what is fascism? Because it's very difficult to define. And he said like, okay, by my, definition, there's like 5 stages of fascism. And like the 5th stage is it's collapse. So like 1 through 4 is like it's build up. And like we're solidly in like phase maybe 3, maybe 4. Like we're like really deep into it. And he literally says in that book, and like it absolutely blows my mind, because I found multiple people who wrote stuff back in like this, like Richard Hofstadter is a historian. He wrote books back in the 60s, talking about the paranoid style and like the Goldwater election administration. Where he literally identifies like white Christian nationalism. He just uses different words for it. And he talks about the connection to conspiracy theories. Like he nailed it. But in Robert Paxton's book, he says, if fascism came to all of these different countries, this is what I think it might look like. And he says that if fascism comes to the United States, it will be dressed up in Christian crosses and American flags. And like literally just nail on the absolute head. Like if the people who stormed January 6th, it was like a mix of people in like tactical gear and like prayer circles, like it was it was completely that. But the other thing that you said something earlier that kind of like reminded me of this, but there's some quotes somewhere about how like information and education, really, that is what helps with like empathy. Like the more like the more empathetic you can be. And for me, like that has been a huge thing in me researching all of this and like reading about like white Christian nationalism and the people that I grew up with, just trying to understand them. It's horrific, and I wholeheartedly condemn the ideology. But I also know, like I said earlier, that like my parents had good intentions. They're trying to be good people. I was trying to be a good person, and I was just told that that's how you become a good person, and how you like please God. But a lot of the people who join these movements, who join like destructive cults, they do it because the reason why people join or believe conspiracy theories is often the same reason why people join cults. And it is because the cults fill social and psychological needs. And you talked about that in a different podcast episode where you're talking about the ABCs of, what was it? Like belonging and, autonomy and
autonomy,
competence. And so, social and psychological needs. And Dr. Margaret Singer, in her book, The Cults in Our Midst, she, instead of cults, she uses the term social and psychological control programs. And I really like that term because it's social and psychological. And so people believe conspiracy theories for the same reasons that they join cults, because it fills social and psychological needs, and because they're looking for answers. It might be like large scale existential problems, like they're worried about climate change, or they're worried about, politics, or it could be internal personal problems, like they have an addiction issue, or they have like relationship problems. And so they find somebody who is offering a solution, and it's an oversimplified, easy solution to a very big, scary thing. And
That's
so, they're trying to be good people. They're trying, they're joining the groups, not because they're evil, and not because they're stupid, and not because they are deficient in some way, but just because they're human. And the idea of saying that, oh, these QAnon people or these, extreme fundamentalists are, well, they're just crazy, or they're hateful, evil people. And a lot of their policies do come across that way, but it's a form of victim blaming, to say that's them. There's something wrong with them. I could never fall for something like that. And it's a way of making yourself feel better. And in doing that, we often minimize the effect that these groups might be having, to say, oh, that's a fringe problem. That's not something that I need to worry about, when it very much is something that we all need to worry about. And what all of these like cult experts agree is that every single person is potentially susceptible to these manipulative like thought reform tactics, just if they're given at the right time in the right way. So like we're not special, and these people are not special. They're not like flawed. We have to, I don't know exactly how to fix anything, but moving forward, in the past when we were preparing for the wedding and everything, I tried to like logic people out of things. I tried to
Mm.
like, tell Kathy Hillary Clinton's not eating babies, like just like give them information and like logic them out of these belief systems and
Mm.
stuff. And like, you can't do it because it's not a logical issue. It's like, it's an emotional issue. And, for me as a white Christian nationalist, what helped me break out of these beliefs, one was just the absurdity of Jewish space lasers, but then two was white Christian nationalism is essentially founded on like two base principles for me, and that was biblical inerrancy and American exceptionalism. And the American exceptionalism is this belief that America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles and that we are blessed by God because of our adherence to Judeo-Christian principles, and we have unprecedented prosperity and blessings and that sort of thing. And if you look, and that's a historical issue, and I think that you can very easily break that down just by
Mm.
understanding, like, there's quotes from the founding fathers who literally say we are not founded on Judeo-Christian principles, like flat out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the idea that we have unprecedented prosperity, if you study American history without like extreme propaganda, like what I was fed my entire life, you immediately dismantle that because we don't have unprecedented freedom. We had slavery for like X hundreds of years, and
Mm.
we're still dealing with these issues. But the biblical inerrancy is much harder to dismantle, and it took me longer to kind of work out of that because
Oh, that's interesting.
I couldn't just walk away from it, because
Yeah.
that's the heart of evangelicalism. That
Mm.
is the core theology, is biblical inerrancy. And so I had to find alternatives. And some of the books that really, really helped me with that was How the Bible Actually Works by Pete Enns. He's a PhD in theology, and Love Wins by Rob Bell. And so people who actually have studied the Bible, that is supposed to be inerrant, who have like PhDs in this sort of thing, who speak the original languages. David Bentley Hart is another really, really good one, that All Shall Be Saved, who flat out just prove that the Bible is contradictory. And what do you do with it once you know that? And like there is still value and potentially like good
Mm.
things that you can learn
Mm.
from these
Absolutely.
scriptures, but it's not what I was taught. And so, moving forward with my family, like, I'm writing my book, basically just my journey of deconstruction, what I found that broke me out of these beliefs, in
Mm.
hopes that, like, my absolutely completely delusional hope is that like somebody can read this and like
Mm.
break out of some of this stuff. But what's probably more likely to happen is that it might be helpful for people who are like me, who have family who are still stuck in these belief systems, or who have
Mm.
deconstructed themselves already, and they're just looking for some more answers, or at least, I can point them to other books and things that have
Yeah.
better answers than I do. So, but
Yeah. Well,
targeting the base beliefs.
yeah. I think you shouldn't underestimate what good can be done by writing a book or by doing a podcast and talking about it and so on. I think that's really, really important that we continue to do that. Um, we get messages from time to time from people saying that they found it really helpful. And yeah, everybody has to make their own journey, but I think knowing that there's other people that have gone through that same journey, experienced some of that same stuff, it can really help. And I do actually think there is some. So my leaving story was actually started with my doubts about the Bible. So Jehovah's Witnesses also are believe in the inerrancy of all of the Bible. It's directly inspired by God. There are no contradictions, and so on and so on. But I started to have doubts based on that, because I started to realize that some of these stories in the Bible, there were stories and they had some morals to them, and they help us with a window into the psyche of the people who existed a couple of thousand years ago, which is fascinating. Who doesn't want to know that? It's really interesting. But as a historical document, it ain't. And it's that started to hit me. So I think that there are opportunities for people to read a book like yours and start to notice things. I think that can happen, and it is a very individual thing, so it just depends. So we're coming to the end of our time together, really. Cynane, and I just wanted to ask how your kind of your thoughts of the future. So you're writing your book, you've got that project on the go, you've got a website which I'll put the link on our show notes so that people can go to it. It's full of really interesting information, and I recommend people do that. They can obviously find out about when your book's going to be released. So what's your hopes for the future? What are you sort of hoping to? What are you looking to?
Yeah, so for me, like I'm still working on the book, like I'm still writing it, and I've never done anything like this before. Like I have an engineering degree, like like I'm not a writer. I'm not like a journalist or anything. So this is it's a big project for me, and it's something that is very different for me, and it's something that is very important to me. So I'm I just hope that I can do it well enough. And so I mean the big thing is just I really want to I need to finish it. I want to finish it
Okay.
and carefully. And then for me, I've had to go mostly no contact with like my family and all of my bridesmaids and like all of my friends growing up and stuff. Like I essentially had to disconnect from that entire community. And I hear I'm not huge on TikTok. I made a couple videos just as kind of like a test, and like I got thousands of comments of people sharing similar worse stories than mine to do with like family believing in QAnon, losing family members to the pandemic because they were anti-vax, and like all of that stuff, and having to go no contact and like that sort of thing. So I know that this is like a huge problem. So I personally I hope that like and I know there's the problem is that there's no quick and easy answer. There's no like simple solution. Like and in reality, a lot of relationships are going to just be permanently lost or permanently damaged, and that is a very sad reality that a lot of people are living with post 2020. And that's for me, I'm just still trying to figure out which relationships can be salvaged, which ones I need to let go, and which ones are just going to be different from now on. So personally, that's kind of like what I'm working through. And I think after I finish the book, that will be like a huge step for me. Speaking on, podcasts like this, connecting with people who are doing the work that you're doing and like having these conversations, it has been so wonderful. And again, thank you for having me on and for everything that you do. And just, hopefully just raising awareness that like to put language to the things that I did not have language for, to point people towards, maybe some books that can explain things better than I can. And, to call out white Christian nationalism as the problem. And there's a lot of really great organizations who are working on that. Americans United is one of them. Authors like Andrew Seidel are like doing a lot of really good work, and like in legal, like in the, like with lawsuits and things. But it's still small. So, just hopefully, being involved, speaking out, and continuing to just kind of like raise awareness. I don't know what I'm doing.
Brilliant. Well, you've got a great voice, and you're so interesting to talk to. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. Thank you so much for being with us, Cynane.
Yeah, thank you so much.